Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the folks yelling "Go Big Red" over here. When you're with Husker fans, you know you're in good shape. Paul Teller mentioned that it's atypical for me to be wearing a suit. I think what his joke was referencing is that on Twitter recently, I've had a guy, you should follow me on Twitter, @BenSasse. On Twitter, I've had a guy who's recently said, I don't look worthy to be a U.S. Senator, I look a lot more like a gym rat. Well, the reality is, as the son of a football and wrestling coach who grew up working on the farm in Nebraska, gym rat is pretty high praise. As my wife says it, you have bad hair, bad teeth, no fashion sense, and no rhythm. There were lots of big, ripe targets. How did you get tagged with the gym rat label, something you'll willingly embrace? So I decided to put on a suit today just to change it up a little bit. So my task today is to define a little bit of what classical conservatism means. And so I want to make sure that we can distinguish among three different terms. The three terms that we should talk about a bit today are Republican, conservative, and American exceptionalism, or the American idea. I am all three. I am a happy Republican, I am a principled, committed conservative, and we obviously all in this room believe deeply in the American idea. We are inheritors of a great and rich tradition. We are blessed to live in the best time in history, in the best country, the best nation that the world has ever known. And so I urge you all to be Republican, to be conservative, and to be American. But it's very important the way we rank order those three. And so I stand before you today, and as a kind of creedal matter, I say, I am an American first, and I am a conservative second, and I am only a Republican third, although I am happily a Republican. And I would like to urge you to think a little bit about how we rank order those different identities. Because if we get them out of order, we actually wage war against them, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. But I think back to C.S. Lewis talking about the little old lady who loved her cat. And he said you can only properly have affection for a cat if you first recognize that the cat can't be the first thing. If you think that a cat might accidentally be God, you'll never know God, nor will you understand the goodness of the gift of a creature that is a cat. And in the same way, when you think about your identity as a member of a political party or as a principled conservative, you have to understand how those things relate to one another and how we rank order them. So we should begin by admitting that it's been a bad 7 years for all three of those categories. It's been a bad 7 years for the Republican Party. It's been a bad 7 years for conservatism. But even more importantly than that, it's been a real bad period for those of us who believe deeply, who cherish, who love the American idea. If you've inherited the American tradition as we have, we want to lift it up. We want to celebrate the American idea. And tragically, we have had in this country the last 7 years a guy as president who said that one of his core purposes is to fundamentally remake America. I don't think we want to remake America. We don't want to change America. We want to recapture the greatness of America, and we want to pass that on to the next generation. We have had as our president a man who doesn't pay respect to the separation of powers, to divided government, which are things that our founders gave us on purpose. These are features, not bugs. We have a president who has tragically said, if the Congress won't do what I want them to do, if they won't pass the laws I wish they would pass, it's no big deal. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can just make up law unilaterally. That's tragic. We have a guy who, as president, pardon me, was asked, do you believe in American exceptionalism? And it's like you could see the political polling running in his head as he said, well, I don't, but I know that I'm supposed to say yes. So I'll say, sure, with a slough. I believe in American exceptionalism the same way that Greeks probably believe in Greek exceptionalism, or the way that Brits might believe in British exceptionalism. Well, Mr. President, that's not actually what American exceptionalism means. American exceptionalism is not some sort of ethnic claim that because of something we received in the bloodstream, Americans are better than other people. American exceptionalism is a claim about history. American exceptionalism is a claim about what happened in the American founding. And if we don't understand why the American founding was extraordinary, you can be sure that our kids won't understand why America is extraordinary. And we live in that kind of time of cultural amnesia. At one level, this has been going on since the 1960s. But this president, in a much more aggressive way, has decided to attack the exceptional nature of American history. And so we should pause and go back to our founding moment, because our founding moment is truly extraordinary. Our founders were making a claim about human dignity. Our founders were saying that everybody, everywhere, not just people like us who've been blessed to be born in this place, but everybody, everywhere, is ordained with natural rights. Everyone everywhere is created in the image of God with natural rights, and government is just our shared project to secure those rights. Government is not the author or the source of any of our rights. Government is a tool. And our founders recognized that that tool is necessary in a fallen world, because unfortunately the world is broken, and there are people who want to take your property, who want to take your liberty, who want to take your life. And so you don't want a world where there's anarchy. We need a world of government to restrain evil. We need a world of government to create a framework for ordered liberty. But government is not the thing that we aspire to. Government is not what we want to be free to. If politics is all you have in your life, you don't understand America. Politics are about creating a framework to be free from so many horrible things in the world, so that you can be free to go and live all the great things that life has for you as you pursue happiness in your local communities, in your churches, in your families, in your schools, in your small businesses, at the PTA, at the Little League, at the Rotary. The meaning of America is not in Washington, D.C. The meaning of America is in all the communities and the little platoons that you come from. And so fundamentally, the American founders understood that throughout almost all of human history, almost everyone had been wrong about the nature of government, because people had almost always said, since the world is broken and we need government, therefore might must make right. The king is the guy who has a monopoly on violence. He can do whatever he wants because he's got the biggest army. The king is free, and the people, they weren't citizens. They were dependent subjects. And so if you wanted to do something, your passive assumption was prohibition. Unless you were expressly allowed to do it, you should assume you're prohibited. So if you want to worship in the way that your conscience demands, but it's not the established church, you need the government to give you paper to say you're a tolerated religion. You want to start a small business? Great. You go and you supplicate before the king and his court, and you see if they'll give you a charter, if they'll give you permission to start that small business, which would benefit your neighbor. But the passive assumption was prohibition. The American founders looked at this and they said, throughout almost all of human history, except maybe a couple of city-states in ancient Greece, throughout almost all of human history, people have been wrong about the nature of government and the nature of freedom. And we, the people in America, believe that our rights come to us via nature, and government is our project to secure them, and so we, the people, give the government enumerated powers. We don't ever wait for the government to give us any rights. We claim those by nature. And so, we are the most exceptional nation in the history of the world because the Constitution is the best political document that's ever been written. And it is a negative document. The Constitution is just a list of powers that we decided to give the government. And when that list ends, the government has no further powers. The Constitution is not some list of the limited rights that the people have, because in our system, the government is limited, and the people's rights are limitless. And the founders back in Philadelphia in 1787 and 1789, they had a big, long debate about this, and they said, well, this is tough because people are always used to having their rights listed. Shouldn't we list them? And they said, no, we will not list them. We will not put the rights in the document, because if we put the rights in the document, at some point the list will end and people will assume that is the end of their rights. And so there was a picture that they had in their mind. Imagine a tiny little island surrounded by a giant ocean. Throughout human history, people have believed that the island is your rights and the ocean is the powers of government. And the American founders said this picture is exactly backwards, because the island is the little set of enumerated powers that we the people give the government, and the ocean is the limitless rights of people who were created with dignity. And yet they said, wait a minute, if we don't list them at all, might people get confused? Let's list a few. And so as a compromise, they said, well, outside the document, let's add the Bill of Rights. So think about this. The first 10 amendments are not in the Constitution proper. The Constitution is just enumerated powers for the government. But then in the Bill of Rights, they said, let's list a few rights just so no one's confused. In fact, we'll start with the most important one. We'll rank order them. Okay, what should we list first? Let's list the most important thing. What's listed first? Religion and speech and press and assembly and the right of redress of grievances. It's a dog's breakfast. It's a laundry list. They couldn't list just one thing first because, again, they wanted to scream, and the structure of their document screams, all the rights are the people's. And so then when you go through the Second Amendment, near and dear to all of our hearts here, when you get to the 9th and 10th Amendment, what do they conclude by saying? There's no end to this list. The 9th and 10th Amendments say, any right not listed here is still a right for the people, and any power not given to the federal government here is still a power that the federal government doesn't have. And so as we in this room are Republicans and conservatives and Americans, we need to know that you have to properly understand your commitment to American exceptionalism and to the American idea as pride of place first on that list. But we live in a time of constitutional crisis. We live in a time when our kids don't understand the American idea. We live in a time when students who should be challenged with competing ideas on college campuses are instead crying out for safe spaces so they never have to encounter an idea that might challenge them. That's a mess. We live at a time when 41% of Americans under age 35 think the First Amendment is dangerous. 41% of Americans under age 35 think the First Amendment is dangerous because someone might use their freedom of speech to say something that hurts someone else's feelings. Actually, that's quite the point. Our founders were debating. Our founders had different views of religion. They were debating heaven and hell. You might hurt somebody's feelings if you talk about mortality and big things. And government is the framework that says we're not going to shoot at each other while we talk about it, but we're going to sit at the table and argue like people with big boy pants on that actually thinks ideas have consequences. And so it was at CPAC when President Reagan said, in a republic, you're always only one generation away from the extinction of freedom. If you don't pass on the meaning of America to the next generation, you will lose it. And we are in that time of constitutional crisis. And so the top concern of all Americans, of all who believe in limited government, of all freedom lovers, should always be that the American idea is held first and foremost. And we should invite people, even from other political parties, to remain constitutionalists. The Democrats have gone post-constitutional. We should invite them back. And so I say to you, when I want you to be a conservative and when I want you to be a Republican, those things must be listed second to being an American. And so let's distinguish what those second things are. Conservatism is a set of policy principles and policy preferences. Republicanism is about an organization. It's about a political party. I love both of these things. I want us to see us make both of these great again. But you have to rank your Americanism first, and then your conservatism second, and only your republicanism third. Because your conservatism is a set of policy preferences, and they matter. It matters what we believe about economic growth and how much intervention the government should have in the economy. Because the 535 people I work with, we aren't smart enough to centrally plan the economy. And so we believe in free markets in this room. And we believe that family structures are the first government and the most important institution that actually raises our kids. Government cannot do that. And we will have debates in this room about foreign policy and about international organizations, and those kind of debates between conservatism and progressivism are really important, and we should fight about them. But our belief about small versus medium-sized government, I think Rick Santorum's coming out in 4 or 5 minutes to come next, and Rick, amen. Rick has a view that we should, I think he has the view that we should raise the minimum wage pretty substantially. I disagree with that as a matter of policy preference, that's small versus medium-sized government, but I recognize that is completely a well-motivated position, somewhere there's a word, and that we should recognize debates about the minimum wage are important, but they could never be ultimate, because America is about limited government. Conservatism is largely about small government, but limited government is more important than small government, and we need to be able to rank order those things. And so as I close, we're not here to talk, or I wasn't here to talk about any of the presidential candidates. But in a time of constitutional crisis, I would suggest to you that as you listen to presidential candidates over the next few days, you should be listening with the ears of grandmas and grandpas worried about your grandsons and granddaughters and whether or not they will understand the American idea. You should be listening to presidential candidates and ask, do they, like Reagan, believe in limited government? Do they, like those of us from the happy champions of the party of Abraham Lincoln, do they believe in equality under the law? Do they believe in the dignity of every man, woman, and child, of every race and every creed to be a part of the American experiment together? Do we believe that fatherless little black boys in the city will feel invited into the Republican Party by the way we lift up the American idea? Do you believe that your candidates should scream forward constructively about the separation of powers because we are skeptical of government overreach and we want to see Obama's unilateralism rolled back? Do you believe that you should hear the beating heart of the American creed, which is the First Amendment, which is that freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech? Will you hear presidential candidates that champion the greatness of Americans, not the greatness of Washington, D.C., or those who would rule us as politicians? You need to hear from your presidential candidates someone that you would want to sit at the dinner table with your children and extol forth the virtues of an America that is about the greatness of 320 million Americans, not the powers of the federal bureaucracy. Do you hear a champion not of tearing more things down, but of building America back up? Because I am anti-establishment, but what we need most of all is not just someone who wants to breathe fire on Washington, but wants to breathe passion into our children for a constitutional recovery, because that's how we will actually make America great again. Thank you.